Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Ruffman. I am your host, John Ruffman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. I want to speak with you today about some very disturbing developments. Let's begin with a Pentagon investigation of Senator Mark Kelly. Let me remind you that Mark Kelly is a senator from Arizona. He is an American hero, an astronaut, a man who has been outspoken and who, by the way, was seriously considered for the vice presidency of the United States on the Democratic ticket. Not only that, he is a potential nominee for President of the United States by the Democrats in 2028. And so there is no doubt that Mark Kelly is a significant figure in our lives. And here's the stunner. The Pentagon announced yesterday that it is investigating Mark Kelly over possible breaches of military law after Kelly, a former Navy pilot with a distinguished record in the service, joined others in the House of Representatives and Senate in a video that called for troops to defy illegal orders. Now, I've listened to that tape several times. I heard nothing that would have suggested that Senator Kelly or any of the others were suggesting that there be defiance by American troops. The Pentagon statement, posted on social media, cited a federal law that allows retired service members to be recalled to active duty on order of the Defense Secretary for possible court-martial if they do something wrong. Well, this is not the first time that it has been suggested that a retired military officer be brought back for court-martial. Remember George Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? There was active talk by the Trump administration of bringing him back for a court-martial. Now, they didn't do it. At least they haven't up to this point. But the question becomes, what does it mean when a United States senator, a former astronaut, a former fighter pilot, a man with a distinguished service record, who simply affirms the right of members of the military to reject a law which they consider to be illegal, and which, by the way, is part of what you are supposed to do if you're in the military. What happens when they talk about bringing them back for trial? The extraordinary statement by the Pentagon was very, very disturbing. Almost as disturbing as the President of the United States, who suggested that those 6 members of Congress who spoke out were, well, theoretically punishable by death. He said that on social media. The President of the United States. The Pentagon suggested that Kelly's statements in the video interfered with, and I want to quote directly, quote, loyalty, morale, or good order and discipline of the armed forces. All that Kelly did was to affirm the right that if you consider an order given to be wrong, you have the right to refuse it. This is very disturbing. A particular order needs to be debated and discussed with a service member's conscience. That was the whole point of the Nuremberg trials. And let me point out that what we are experiencing now is the 80th anniversary of the opening of the Nuremberg trials. There's even a new movie out about Hermann Goering called Nuremberg. I haven't seen it yet. But I'm intrigued by the idea that the President of the United States has now decided that his words, that he is going to go after and punish his enemies, is now coming true. This is incredible. Kelly was one of 6 Democratic lawmakers who served in the military and who made this video. Let me remind you that Kelly was a fighter pilot before becoming an astronaut. And then, you will recall, his wife, Gabby Giffords, was shot. She was a member of Congress. She left the House, and he ran for the United States Senate. Let's make clear that Secretary Pete Hegseth, who is the Secretary of Defense legally, not the Secretary of War, which is what he now calls himself, has agreed with this. And let me be clear. Kelly's conduct brings discredit upon the armed forces and will be addressed appropriately, said Pete Hegseth. He said it on his X account. And he went on to say, their foolish screed sows doubt and confusion, which only puts our warriors in danger. No, Secretary Hegseth. What puts our warriors in danger is when the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of Defense use their role to prosecute, and I would even suggest persecute, people who are their identified political enemies. The chief Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, said, "Our military follows orders and our civilians give legal orders." That is usually true, but it is not necessarily true. We remember, very important point, that troops, especially uniformed commanders, do have specific obligations to reject orders that are unlawful, if they make that determination. There is no doubt in my mind that this is an abuse of power, a terrible abuse of power, an abuse of power which now we are seeing in full flower by the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense. Let me point out again, I refuse to call it the Department of War. Why? Because Congress voted in 1947 to create a Department of Defense. They did away with the Department of War. And each and every person affirmed as secretary has been affirmed as Secretary of Defense. I do not believe that the President of the United States has the unilateral right to rename a department. It's just that simple. But there was another case yesterday. A federal judge dismissed the criminal charges against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. The reason? He concluded that the prosecutor who brought the charges at President Donald Trump's order was illegally appointed by the Justice Department, and indeed by the President. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Cameron I want to give the name right, Cameron McGowan, was clear. And so, without prejudice, this order was issued. Now, they can be retried. And this morning, the Justice Department is saying that's exactly what they plan to do. The order is very clear. It does not concern the substance of the allegations. Simply has to do with the prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan, who was named to her position as interim U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, that appointment was not legal. And so the Justice Department can now reinstitute this series of charges against Letitia James and maybe Comey. We don't know because the statute of limitations on Comey had expired. The administration is arguing that, yes, indeed, they can proceed. So we'll see what the court decides. Comey and James have separately asserted that the prosecutors were vindictive and emblematic of a weaponized Justice Department. And that's a very important point, because what the president has done is to weaponize the Justice Department, the very thing he accused, without foundation, the Biden administration of doing. Now, I worked for Richard Nixon, as all of you know. And one of the things that really disturbs me is the weaponization of the Department of Justice. That is something which should be rejected by all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Let me remind you that Comey was indicted on charges of making false statement and obstructing Congress. James was charged soon after that in a mortgage fraud investigation. Now look, let's be clear. This president has an enemies list, and this president is determined to punish his enemies. And the problem is that when you make the Justice Department part of the criminal prosecution, there is something wrong. The whole point of the Justice Department is that it be impartial. The president gave the order to the Attorney General of the United States to make sure that indictments were brought against Comey and James. And that is precisely what happened. Does anyone listening to the sound of my voice doubt that if Donald Trump had not given that order, there would have been no indictments forthcoming against Comey and James? Now, this all may be considered again, and I hope it is. No attorney that I have spoken with believes that this malfeasance in office by the Attorney General will be sustained. And certainly the order by the president, equally questionable. James has also been a frequent target of Trump's ire, especially since she won a staggering judgment against him and the Trump Organization in a lawsuit alleging that he defrauded banks. An appeals court overturned the fine, but upheld a lower court's finding that Trump had committed fraud. Look, I have to tell you, the only thing that matters to me is the principle that the Justice Department is now weaponized. There is no doubt that that is the case. And let me tell you something, if Comey or James are really guilty of something, well, let it be aired. And you will note, by the way, that Comey wanted all of this to go to court because he believed and believes to this day that he would be vindicated. I want to conclude this podcast by talking about Ukraine. The news has come to us, to all of America and the world, that there is a deal pending, that the United States and Ukraine have reached certain agreements. We don't know what they are yet. The Russians have made no comment. All I can tell you is that even in the midst of these talks, Ukraine is being shattered by missiles and bombings, and it's a disgrace. I don't know what the final deal will be. I don't know if there will be a final deal, but I will tell you this. All of us will be watching carefully to see what is attempted to be imposed as a so-called peace deal. And we know that Ukraine will not only have to sign off through President Zelensky, but also its parliament, and ultimately, we are told, a referendum among the Ukrainian people. So that will be for another day. We will see how that all evolves. In the meantime, consider carefully what Donald Trump is doing in weaponizing the Justice Department and the American presidency. Consider carefully his decision to have Senator Kelly prosecuted and persecuted. There is something wrong in this administration. Make no doubt about it. Well, we're going to watch this all carefully as it develops over the next few hours. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links to the show to connect with me in social media. Remember, please, to share this episode, and others with friends or colleagues so we can continue to grow and expand. I also want to remind you I'm taking Thanksgiving Day off, so there will be no podcast on Thursday. This show has been getting such positive attention that we're excited to bring an advertising support to you, and you've heard that at the beginning and at the end of this podcast. This will help us create more opportunities for Around the Political World, and we're happy that that's happening. This is John Rothman. I want to say a special thank you to Go Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast, and I will be back tomorrow with another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.